Hello, dear friends. Today is February 2nd, 2026 on the calendar, and we are beginning our traditional overview of the combat actions map. At the current moment, changes have been recorded along almost the entire line of military contact. However, I propose to start today's episode with the news block. A rather unexpected statement was made yesterday by the head of the Mykolaiv region, Vitaly Kim. According to his words, territories are undoubtedly important, but the lives of Ukrainian citizens are more important. A peace agreement must be signed because all sides are already completely exhausted. As we can observe, such calls are sounding louder and louder and are already originating not only from opposition figures but also from representatives of Volodymyr Zelensky's inner circle. What do you think? Be sure to write your opinion in the comments. Would such statements have arisen if the Ukrainian army were not in a state of exhaustion, or not? It is also worth paying attention to the words of Alexander Sersky, who stated, "The main priority remains the preservation of the life and health of every Ukrainian serviceman, the rapid evacuation of the wounded, and the provision of high-quality medical assistance." All these statements collectively indicate that the topic of surrender is becoming increasingly relevant and is approaching reality more and more closely. So, friends, we proceed to the overview of the second day of February. Traditionally, the first days of each new month are characterized by reduced activity. This was the case in November, then in December, and in January. The past 24 hours were also no exception. Not many large-scale breakthroughs were recorded. However, it is important to note that advancements did occur, and in one of the sectors, several dozen fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine found themselves surrounded. We will definitely talk about this in more detail, but let us move forward sequentially. Let us begin with the Zaporozhye direction. In the comments, you have repeatedly asked the question, is the settlement of Rekhnoye under the control of Russian troops? At the moment, I can say the following. There is still no objective control footage confirming the final capture of the settlement. Formally, its capture was announced. However, we have not yet seen visual evidence of the Russian presence. This means that we continue to adhere to our main principle. If there are no confirming frames, then the settlement is not considered taken. It is better not to record control temporarily, even if it has actually been established, than to prematurely announce its occupation and then receive a refutation and find out that the territory remains with the armed forces of Ukraine. This is precisely the logic we are guided by, which is why this sector is not yet colored on the map. Nevertheless, it is known that Russian units entered this settlement, and this fact was confirmed, among others, by Ukrainian military analysts. There is also another important point. On the map, you see the Konka River, which flows into the Kakhovka Reservoir. It might seem that reaching Rekhnoye or Veselyanka would become a natural limit for further advancement, as crossing a water barrier looks like a difficult task. However, there is a significant nuance here. After the explosion of the Kakhovka Reservoir Dam, the Konka River became significantly shallower and, in this sector, effectively turned into a small stream. Thus, in terms of a water barrier, it no longer represents a serious problem. The complexity of the sector lies elsewhere. The area is extremely saturated with engineering fortifications. Everything has been dug up, poured with concrete, and equipped with many strongpoints. The sky is literally filled with drones, and the armed forces of Ukraine prepared the sector for defense over the course of several years to prevent an approach to Zaporozhye from the southern direction. Therefore, one cannot expect any sharp breakthroughs or, even more so, reaching Zaporozhye in the coming months. Nevertheless, Russian units are performing extremely difficult and important work here, literally gnawing through this multi-level defense. Moving on, in the Orekov sector, there are no significant changes. Until either the Dnieper grouping cuts the Zaporozhye-Orekov highway from the west, or the Vostok grouping emerges from the eastern direction. One should not expect serious news from here. However, regarding the sector of responsibility of the Vostok grouping, reports were received yesterday, specifically from Ukrainian sources, that Russian units entered the settlement of Tsvetkovoye. Given the small size of this village, it can be assumed that we will hear positive news in the very near future. It is not excluded that information about its complete capture will appear as early as today or tomorrow. Changes were also recorded in the area of Kosovtsevo. Previously, Russian troops launched strikes on positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the southern part of the settlement, and at that time we marked it as being under the control of the Ukrainian army. However, after taking Zaporozhye, Russian units established control over Kosovtsevo as well. Furthermore, reports are coming in that Pokrovsk has finally passed under the control of the Russian army as of today. The Vostok grouping, as before, published objective control footage of the battles for this settlement. Now let us move to the Pokrovsk direction. A significant amount of news and changes continues to arrive from here. In the area of Grishino, a high intensity of combat actions persists. Today, reports appeared that Russian troops significantly expanded their zone of control in the western part of the central pond area. The pond itself is located here, and it is in this territory that Russian units are currently situated. The entire zone marked in red has passed under their complete control. Only quite recently was it reported that the armed forces of Ukraine were trying to push back the Russian forces in this sector. But at the moment, information of a different nature is arriving. The Russian army has achieved tangible successes here and is gradually pushing through the enemy's defenses. With a high degree of probability, the combat actions have already moved into the central part of the settlement. However, confirmed data has so far only been received for this specific sector. Nevertheless, it can be expected that in the near future, we will see serious advancements in favor of the Russian side. Active combat actions also continue in the area of Udashnoye, or more precisely, north of this settlement. The Russian side is actively using first-person view drones as well as artillery. Despite the fact that on the map this area looks like open terrain with fields, in reality a huge number of fortified areas of the armed forces of Ukraine are concentrated here, which seriously complicate the advancement of Russian troops. Additional difficulties are created by the high concentration of Ukrainian first-person view drone crews located in Sergeyevka. These positions are also being struck by drones and artillery. However, at the current moment, neither Russian nor Ukrainian advancement has been recorded here. We are moving to the Dobropoli salient. Very serious changes have been recorded in this direction today. First and foremost, they concern the settlement of Suketskoye. According to the incoming information, Suketskoye, in all likelihood, is already under the full control of Russian troops. There is no official confirmation yet, but the information comes from authoritative sources, so I have made changes to the map in advance. There is practically no doubt that video materials will appear in the near future, either with the raising of a flag or with the presence of Russian military personnel. A similar situation, apparently, is taking shape in the area of Suvarovo. I will remind you that previously these settlements changed hands repeatedly, but now they are, in all likelihood, under the steady control of the Russian army. Furthermore, Russian units have expanded their zone of control south of Nikhanorovka. Most likely the straightening of the front line along the railway branch passing through this sector is currently underway. There is a high probability that this entire territory will pass under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the coming days. Regarding Belitskoye, confirmed information about the consolidation of Russian units and the occupation of part of the settlement is still absent. As soon as objective data appears, the corresponding changes will be made to the map. Reports were received today from Novi Donbass regarding a mopping-up operation being conducted, after which no additional news from this sector has been received so far. And finally, we will move to the area of Sofiivka and Toretsk. From here, reports are arriving that Toretsk may have finally passed under the full control of the Russian troops. However, the information has not yet been confirmed and requires additional verification. Therefore, it is premature to make changes to the map. At the same time, an expansion of the control zone both to the east and to the south of Sofiivka has been recorded. The so-called pocket has been cleared and is now entirely under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, the territory south of Sofiivka has also passed under the control of the Russian army. It is important to take into account that the Kazeny-Toretsk River flows through this sector. The front line for a long time passed specifically along the bed of this river. Previously, there were reports of a high concentration of Ukrainian first-person view drone crews, which did not allow Russian units to force a crossing of the water barrier. However, against the backdrop of incoming information regarding control over Toretsk, the situation may change significantly. We will find out in the very near future how much this data corresponds to reality. Regarding Kostiantynivka, a very remarkable piece of information appeared yesterday from the Ukrainian side. We are referring to a report from a soldier of the armed forces of Ukraine with the call sign Muchnoy, who also maintains his own Telegram channel. According to him, the settlement of Ilinivka, specifically this village, is at the current moment in the so-called grey zone. This means that the armed forces of Ukraine have effectively lost full control over it and can no longer hold it in its previous format. This information is indeed extremely interesting. If Russian units manage to move Ilinivka from the grey zone into a zone of steady control in the near future, having finally established themselves there, the consequences will be very tangible. The fact is that Ilinivka is effectively directly connected to Kostiantynivka, and in such a case, the possibility arises to gradually seep into the western districts of the city. This signifies a completely different level of pressure on Kostiantynivka. Overall, this sector is worth watching closely now. Parallel to this, the Russian army has a confirmed advancement directly in the eastern part of Kostiantynivka. According to the received data, Russian units were able to advance by more than 1 kilometer in the residential sector and occupy the territory of the Mayskaya substation. As we can see, step by step, meter by meter, and sometimes by entire kilometers, the city is gradually passing under the control of the Russian army. If it is possible to connect the positions from the southern outskirts of Novodmitrivka in such a manner, pressure on the city from the eastern direction will also intensify significantly. In the event that Kostiantynivka can be squeezed from 3 directions simultaneously, from the side of Ilinivka, Novodmitrivka, and from the south, the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine will likely not collapse instantly, but will degrade significantly faster. Next, we move along the map. From the Seversk direction, changes and new reports are also arriving. Let us begin with confirmed advancements. They concern the settlement of Minkivka. Video material was published from this area, capturing a strike by a Ukrainian drone on a forward position of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the residential development of Minkivka. At the same time, Russian troops were able to advance by more than 2 kilometers and occupied new positions in the central part of the settlement. The entire territory marked in red has, at this moment, passed under the full control of Russian units. Simultaneously, contradictory information is coming from Russian sources regarding the Orikovo-Vasilivka area. Some sources claim that a large group of the armed forces of Ukraine was blocked in this settlement. The essence is that Russian troops expanded their control zone from several directions at once, whereas Orikovo-Vasilivka was previously largely under the control of the Ukrainian side. However, this information raises doubts, as it was previously reported that this settlement had been completely cleared. Today, statements are being made about the blocking of Ukrainian units there. It is currently unclear exactly whom to believe. Nonetheless, Orikovo-Vasilivka is already marked on the map in favor of the Russian army, as confirming materials regarding the presence of the Russian military were received from a number of points. Similar confirmations arrived from other sectors in this area. Furthermore, Novomarkovo is also under the control of Russian units. Based on this, it is unlikely that Ukrainian forces are indeed blocked in Orikovo-Vasilivka, unless, of course, it involves the entry of some large sabotage and reconnaissance group. In any case, at the current moment, changes in this sector are marked for you in red. We are moving north, in the direction of the settlement of Reznikovka. As you remember, a certain territory was cleared here yesterday, and Russian troops established full control over it. Today, an additional expansion of the control zone occurred in this sector of the line of military contact. Thus, Russian units are gradually straightening the front line. At the same time, no advancement to the west of Reznikovka has been recorded at the moment, although such reports have arrived from here previously. As of today, the situation here looks exactly like this. Now let us move to the news from the Kharkiv region. Advancement of Russian units has also been recorded here. In the northern part of Kurilivka, the fighters were able to move forward and reach the approaches to the Kurilivka 1 high-rise residential micro-district. In essence, this micro-district was taken into an operational encirclement. It was specifically this area that was the key fortified zone which previously prevented a final resolution of the Kurilivka issue, as approximately 10 high-rise buildings are located in this area. As you can see, the bottleneck for exiting this micro-district now measures less than 1.5 kilometers, approximately 1 kilometer and 400 meters. To be more precise, it is about 700 meters on each side. And this entire corridor is completely under fire. Yes, we are not talking about large units of the armed forces of Ukraine, neither about brigades nor about regiments. However, according to the latest data, there were several dozen Ukrainian servicemen in the micro-district. It is also noteworthy that according to radio intercepts, they requested permission from the command to withdraw. However, they never received the order to withdraw and, as a result, remained in their positions. As long as they are not finally pushed from the southern direction, and as long as the exit corridor has not been reduced to 1 kilometer, they theoretically still retain the possibility of attempting to withdraw. However, such an attempt will in any case be practically suicidal, and even if successful, will involve extremely heavy losses. For the Russian side, the key point is that in the event of the final suppression of this fortified area, the Kurilivka issue will be closed, as it was precisely on this micro-district that the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine was currently resting. And the last advancement also pertains to the Kharkiv region. After the capture of the settlement of Zilin, Russian units were able to dislodge the enemy from the heights south of the village and reach the approaches to the neighboring Neskuchna. If the offensive can be developed further and Neskuchny can be occupied, this could seriously activate the entire Lipsy sector of the front. For now, such a development of events looks more like a scenario from the category of unlikely. However, the situation remains dynamic, and it is worth watching closely. Friends, this brings our review for today to an end. I thank you for your attention and for staying with us. If the information was useful, please support the episode with a like and write your opinion in the comments. This is truly important. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new reports and operational updates. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and see you soon in the next episode.